Welcome to the Unusual History of Everything, the podcast that uncovers the unusual history of everything around us. I'm Karen Lacey.
And I'm Melanie Dellis. On this episode, we talk about how artists use dead people to make their paintings come alive.
Oh my gosh, I feel like jazz hands come alive.
I
like
did
with
too.
jazz
I
hands.
thought the same thing. I was like, come alive. You can't see my fingers, but they're like doing jazz hands.
Well, we've done a podcast or two on corpse medicine and how people of long ago used mummies as cures. These people included Galen, a 2nd century CE Roman doctor and philosopher, and Paracelsus, a 16th century Swiss alchemist and doctor. Both touted the medicinal benefits of mixing burnt human remains into an elixir, and Paracelsus brought in the whole like cures like effects, meaning the best way to cure whatever is making a person sick is by using parts of another person. For example, if you suffer from headaches, drinking an elixir containing ground human skull would do the trick.
Makes sense to me. During medieval times, these cure-alls were called mumia and sold all around the towns. You would think they called it that because they were using mummies, but the word mumia in early medical writings from the Middle East refers to a natural mineral pitch called bitumen or tar. During the mummification process, the Egyptians coated the mummies with dark resins that made their skin look dark like tar. When Middle Eastern people first saw them in the 7th century AD, they assumed they were covered in tar and so began calling them mumia.
In an 18th century pharmaceutical treatise by Dr. Robert James called Medicinal Dictionary, mumia can be used to describe the liquids that come out of embalmed bodies, which is described as being a, quote, resinous, hardened, black shining surface of a somewhat acrid and bitterish taste and fragrant smell. End quote. Now, there are a few things happening here. First, during this time, some bodies were being embalmed with the Egyptian methods of draining the blood and filling the body cavities with salt and fragrant spices and herbs, which explains why Dr. James said the liquids oozing from the bodies had a fragrant smell, but an acrid and bitter taste? How the heck did he know what it tasted like?
Yeah, I don't think we want to know that, but honestly, he probably did taste it when it came out of the body. I mean, think about it. People drank and ate human remains to cure things, so he likely didn't think it would harm him in any way. Of course, now we know not to lick things that are coming out of dead bodies because of the bad bacteria that grows during decomposition. And that's the other thing that happens. Even after 18th century embalming, even if there's a little blood left in the body, it will turn a dark color and begin to get thick. And about 10 to 20 days after death, the body enters the process of black putrefaction where the dark fluids are released.
Yes, and it is that dark color, which ranges from dark purple to brown, that made people in the Middle Ages take notice. When mixed into an elixir, the rich color was one of the most beautiful browns, and it was at this time that mummy brown paint was created. During the 16th and 17th centuries, painters decided to mix ground-up mummies with myrrh and white pitch, which is a reddish-brown resin that comes from Norwegian spruce trees. The color produced was a brown that no one had ever seen before, and artists around the world began craving it.
Not only did this begin the era of the mummy brown paint, it began an era of grave robbing like the world had never seen. The mummy trade of the 19th century became so big in Europe that even tourists would dig up mummies, break them into pieces small enough to fit into their luggage, and smuggle them back home. From there, they would go to factories that were set up to turn them into paint on a large scale. Arthur Herbert Church, a British chemist and painter, was quoted as saying that one mummy could be used to make 20 years of paint. Although this whole process was illegal, it was profitable, and like so many other illegal things that made money, the law looked away.
And so mummy brown paint began to be sold to painters and quickly became all the rage. Painters loved it because it could be used as an oil paint, a watercolor paint, or for glazing and shading. It had an alluring color that was the best to paint. Ironically, flesh tones. It gave a pleasing effect on the canvas, and probably most of all, artists couldn't resist using such an odd and rare and ancient material in their creations. In 1781, the poet George George Keat wrote a poem called Epistle to Angelica Kaufman, where he wrote over 32 pages on how mummies now can live forever in Kaufman's paintings. And in a way, I suppose that's true, as many famous paintings around today were created or alleged to be created using mummy brown.
You know, I have to say that if I were an artist who painted and had the opportunity to use that paint, I probably would. I know it's wrong.
Oh, I know
it's wrong, but I don't think that I could resist.
I know you would, because you'd just be like, ooh, that's just too cool.
Yeah.
And I'd be the one picketing saying, don't use dead people.
But you know what? No, now that you would, you totally would.
I totally.
But now that those words came out of my mouth, I'm going to actually say that I'm changing my mind. I don't think I could, because even though a really big part of me would think it's super cool and weird, and I love that creepy, weird stuff, you know, I think there's a bigger part of me that wouldn't want to chance having any kind of ghost
or like being disrespectful,
evil spirit. I was totally not even thinking about being disrespectful. I was like, I don't want the wrath of whoever body is ground up into my painting to come after me. I believe in ghosts too much to want to chance having something haunt me for using that. Although it does sound intriguing, and I like the whole multimedia aspect of it. You know, I like to buy paintings that have metal or fabric or paper or something else with the paint. I think that's super cool.
Yeah. Instead, I think you should do a mummy tour where you go look at some of the paintings that are potentially, you know, that have been said to like this either does or maybe does or definitely does contain mummy brown paint. And that would be how you can do that.
I would want to own one though. No, I wouldn't.
No, you wouldn't. No, you wouldn't.
You're right.
They're probably too expensive anyway.
Oh, I know. I wouldn't be able to afford it. Well, while we don't know which paintings were created with mummy brown, what we do know is that the paint was being used for over 200 years, becoming a favorite of the pre-Raphaelite artists of the 19th century. There are historical receipts that list artists Eugene Delacroix, Sir William Beechley, and Edward Burne-Jones as having purchased mummy brown paint, so it's safe to say at least the works of art created by those men contain mummy brown. If you examine paintings in this time period, you may be able to guess which used mummy brown. From a chemical makeup point of view, the paint had several things wrong with it, which could make it easy to pinpoint which paintings used it and which did not.
Because all mummified bodies are different, so too is their chemical makeup and how they react to air, sunlight, and other environmental factors. These things all played a role in making the paint unstable, and this instability made the paint crack after it had dried. And that cracked surface does characterize the look of most British paintings during the 18th and 19th centuries. Despite this, artists loved the paint and the color it produced, and it seemed they didn't care or maybe just didn't believe what the paint was really made of. However, that changed when pre-Raphaelite artists were finally convinced of the paint's true origins and the effects of the unstable paint had on the surrounding colors.
Burne-Jones, the artist I mentioned earlier as having purchased mummy brown paint, even went so far as to give his remaining paint tubes a proper burial in his garden. You would think the factories producing mummy brown would go out of business at this point, but it wasn't until the mid-1960s that they actually stopped. And that was only because they couldn't get mummies easily. An employee of C. Robertson and Company, the largest factory making mummy brown paint, and a company still supplying to artists today, by the way, told Time magazine that there were still mummy parts in the paint shop during the 1980s. He was quoted as saying, "We might have a few odd limbs lying around somewhere, but not enough to make any more paint." End quote. So disturbing.
That's really disturbing. Can you think, I'm going to go make paint today. I'm going to use berries and some flowers. Oh, wait, should I make mummy brown? I mean,
I do have a hand over there.
I mean, it's so dark. It's such a dark thing to think about. It's like they're making paint out of so many beautiful things.
I mean, money
and
talks,
then you're making
right?
it out of
It was the
mummies.
most profitable paint color. But what I can't get over is like in the 1980s or 60s, 70s, 80s, whatever, you're like a new employee and you're like, I'm going to go down there and make some paint. And you're like, why is there like half a body sitting on the floor? Like, what?
Like, how is this not like an HR complaint waiting to happen?
It's so crazy.
It's like, I can't work at the paint store anymore. Why can't you? Well, because there's this dead mummy behind me and they want me to grind it up. Like, I don't think so.
Their HR's like, well, that's okay. I thought you were going to say you had sexual harassment or something. Like, who cares about the mummy?
Oh my gosh, but think about this. They talk about making mummy brown using Egyptian mummies, right? Oh my gosh. This is a plot for a new movie for you, or a book that you want to write. Oh my gosh, think about this.
What?
So instead of using mummies, they actually people were murdered and then went through there was a side company that would mummify them and then sell them to the paint company, getting rid of all your evidence that the murder even happened.
I love that.
Right?
Well, that reminds me of the House of Wax, remember?
Right? How many of these mummies were actually Egyptian mummies or actually murder victims?
Oh.
Just saying. Nobody checked.
Nobody did check.
Right?
That's
especially
crazy. Yeah,
especially
we don't know.
since so many people, so many people in our own research at this moment were starting to kind of go through the stages of their loved ones were going through the mummification process.
Yeah.
So why not be hey, let's take Aunt Sally, let's mummify her and then sell her to make paint so we can get money.
Okay, but you would have to probably wait some number of years for the mummy to get crispy and dusty, right? I think they're using mummies that are 2,000 years old.
Right, but there's
5,000 years old.
There's ways of speeding up the process a little bit if you tried.
All right, so the very next time I need to do this, I'm going to have to pick your brain.
Use a desiccant.
Oh yeah, that's
You
true.
just take out the air in the environment and the moisture in the environment, right? And really do that and dry everything out and you could get it.
I believe that there was a demon, if you listen to our Demon Bowl podcast earlier, there is a demon that does that for you. It sucks your moisture out of your body.
That's disgusting.
Well, I'm just saying, maybe you could call in that demon, have it take care of that person that you just killed's moisture, and then trap it in the Demon Bowl.
Or you just put them in an environment where you suck up all the oxygen out of the air. And leave the demon out of it.
Or that. Yeah, it's probably safer.
That brings us to the end of our episode. You can follow the Unusual History of Everything podcast on Instagram at the Unusual History of Everything and on Facebook at the Unusual History of Everything podcast. Find our show notes on www.musecuratorial.com. The Unusual History of Everything is written, produced, and directed by Melanie Dellis and Karen Lacey.
New episodes air every Tuesday on all podcast outlets. Be sure to subscribe to us so you never miss an episode and leave us a review. You can also see photos from our episodes and more on our website, Instagram, and Facebook. Thanks for listening. I'm Melanie Dellis.
And I'm Karen Lacey, your host for the Unusual History of Everything.
Da, 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 da.